From the north, this green paradise is framed by the snow-white Alps, and from the southwest, like a stone zipper to Sicily itself, the reach of the Apennines stretches along the Italian route. It is a certain spirit of speed hovers over this area, and for 2 decades now this spirit has been visiting a small town on the outskirts of the racing valley, in the foothills of the Apennines once a year for several days. If you take the train to the East Coast in Milan in just a couple of hours, Italy's most famous racing attraction will flash before you, as if on a giant screen. Milan, home of Italia's greatest champion Alberto Ascari, and home to the brilliant Alfa Romeo racing team of the 1950s. Monza is the star of Italian motorsport. Parma, famous not only for its milk, but also for the Dallara factories based here. Modena is the city where Enzo Ferrari was born, and later the factory of the famous Ferrari, Maserati, Lamborghini, and the basis of the tiny teams of Alejandro De Tomaso and Valerio Calotti. Just a few kilometers to the south is Maranello, where the modern base of Ferrari is located, and now you enter Bologna, in 1947 sheltered by the Autofork Maserati brothers, who founded OCA, and in 1961 Carlo Chitti, who escaped from Ferrari and created ATS. Further east you will reach the Minardi fiefdom of Faenza, and just 10 kilometers before Faenza, in the heart of the racing valley, you will find another stop. A small, inconspicuous-looking town with kerosene name, Imola. When the Romans founded a small settlement on this site in 80 BC, they named it Forum Cornelia. Who the Cornelia was? History is silent. But the name didn't take root, and soon the Roman legions descending into the valley from the spurs of Apennines began to call this green island Imola, from the Latin Emilia, which means down there. They also largely determine the appearance of the city. Over the centuries, Imola gradually flourished and, over time, despite its modest size, had become one of the leading historical, cultural and economic centers of the entire Emilia-Romagna region. It was here, under the canopy of the mighty trees of the Mineral Park, 54 years ago, the stories that glorified Imola began. Destroyed by the war and tormented by the dictatorship of Mussolini, Italy was getting out of the crisis. But it cost a lot of effort. Almost the entire population of the country worked hard at public works. In Imola, with the help of the townspeople, they decided to build a road on the southern outskirts of the town, which was supposed to connect via Emilia, today the Ripazzi turn is located at this place, with the village of Cadrigana, in the area of modern Tosa. Who knows, perhaps this road would have turned today into one of the streets of the sprawling Imola, if then, on a warm summer night in 1948, in the minds of 4 young people walking slowly around the Aqua Mineral, the bold idea to build a racetrack around the park hadn't been born. All of them, Alfredo Campagnoli, Graziano Gallinelli, Ugo Mattevecchi and Gualtiero Vici, lived in Imola and raved about motorcycle racing. However, sheer enthusiasm wasn't enough, and praise to the Lord that in Imola there was a man who supported their idea. An experienced and very healthy businessman and a great motor racing enthusiast, Dr. Francesco Costa, who entered the history of the motorsport under the pseudonym Keka, instantly set about building a racetrack. He was ready to donate all his capital to the construction of the track, and quickly managed to convince the chairman of the Imola Sports and Tourism Association, ST, Tommaso Maffei Alberti, to support this undertaking. A few weeks later, the plan drawn up by Keka and Alberti was sent for approval to the Italian National Olympic Committee. Sioni, the main Olympian of the country, Giulio Onesti, fully supported the project, but with one caveat. Sioni had no money for construction. When STI agreed to build the track at its own expense, only later she joined the financing of the project, The president of Sioni announced the grandiose plans for the construction of not one, but 12 autodromes in Italy at once. And although these plans weren't destined to be fully realized, on March 22, 1915, the construction of a new route began in Imola. Due to the numerous problems associated with expropriation of the lands adjacent to the autodrome, construction was delayed for 2.5 years. But on October 19, 1952, the rumble of tractors on the autodrome ring was replaced for the first time by the historical roar of racing car engines. Enzo Ferrari, from the moment the track was laid, was in a great trepidation about its construction. After all, the new circuit was located only a few tens of kilometers from the Ferrari base in Maranello. Brought to Imola Sports Ferrari 340, driven by the first F1 world champion Giuseppe Farina, Luigi Villaresi, and F2 rookie Alberto Ascari. This is a track setting its first record, 149 km per hour. Motorcycle racers Mazzetti, Lorenzetti, and Matroneri lost to them by more than 10 km per hour, racing around the ring at the average speed of 138 km per hour. But it was the motorcyclists who were destined to officially open the track in Imola. 6 months later, on April 25, 1953, at the circuit they called Casticello in the honor of the nearby park, the Imola Automobile Club organized the Grand Prix Coni, which became one of the stages of the Italian Motorcycle Racing Championship in the 125 and 500 cubic centimeters classes. And also already a year later, on June 20, 1954, the first auto race was held in Imola, the Golden Shell Race, which was won by Umberto Maionelli in a sports Ferrari. Yet for the first 15 years the track remains in the domain of motorcycle racers. Auto racing after the third and penultimate Grand Prix of Imola was played in 1956, returning to the track only in the 63rd, when an F1 race that wasn't included in the World Championship was organized at the circuit. But it was just a first tentative step. Motorcycle racing has become more and more commonplace every year. 4 years later, after the first stands built in the front of the pits in 1965, before that spectators simply stood along the fenders, the National Grand Prix in Imola was included in the calendar of the World Motorcycle Racing Championship. Automobile competitions appeared here less and less. Only in 1970 to 1972, 3 Formula 2 rounds were finally held in Imola, 2 of which even entered the European Championship standings. Then Kenko Costa suddenly got excited about the idea of turning Imola into a European Daytona, and in 1974 to 1977 he held 3 races of the World Championship of Sports Prototypes at the circuit. But the real heyday of Imola began only in 1979, when Formula 1 returned to the track near Santerno River. The Italian Automobile Club, ACI, which after the death of Sweet Ronnie Peterson at the start of the 1978 Italian Grand Prix, fell under a thorough accusation of non-compliance with elementary safety standards in Monza, decided, just in case, to find a replacement for the Autodromo Nazionale. And as an experiment, they arranged an Imola not included in the World Championship Dino Ferrari Grand Prix race. The name of the Grand Prix was chosen by the new name of the circuit. Back in 1970, as a sign of friendship and disposition towards Enzo Ferrari, the owners of the track assigned it to the name of their eldest son, Commendatore Dino. Actually, his son's name was Alfredo, but his friends called him Alfredino, then completely reduced this diminutive name to Dino, who died in 1956 from leukemia at the age of 24. Ferrari, for his part, as the sports director of FOCA, did everything in his power to bring the World Championship round to Imola. As a result, the very next year the circuit received the rights to host the 31st Italian Grand Prix, the first Italian Grand Prix included in the World Championship and not played in Monza. The success of the Grand Prix exceeded all expectations. In Imola, they prepared well for the reception of Formula One. They built a new medical center. In those years, it was one of the best in Formula One. Updated the pits, the press center, and expanded the paddock. And the race, which gathered more than 150,000 spectators, not only went with the band, but was also awarded the annual FIA award for the best organization of the Grand Prix. Naturally, after such resounding success, ACI, which decided to return the Italian Grand Prix to Monza the next year, could no longer simply take away the World Championship stage from Imola. Therefore, with the consent of FISA, the following decision was made. The National Grand Prix returned to the Autodromo Nazionale, and the Dino Ferrari track began to host the San Marino Grand Prix. So the smallest state in Europe after the Vatican and Monaco received its Grand Prix. Of course, the Dino Ferrari circuit wasn't the closest racetrack to the Republic. After all, just 15 kilometers from San Marino, in Misano, the Santa Monica circuit is located, and in 1978 to 1979 the Formula Prix San Marino Grand Prix was already played on this track. But the FIA didn't quibble over formalities, and on May 3rd, 1981, in Imola started the first F1 Grand Prix of San Marino. This time, because of discussing weather, it gathered less than 18,000 spectators, but in subsequent years attendance has grown steadily, and after a record 187,000 spectators who gathered in Imola in 1983, only 3 times in 1992 to 1994 fell below 150,000 people. In 1988, when Enzo Ferrari died in Modena, the name of commentator himself was added to the name of Dino in the name of the Autodrome. The favorite track of the old master has acquired its current name, the circuit named after Enzo and Dino Ferrari. They say that once back in early 50s, when Enzo first came to Imola to look at the construction of the circuit, they usually call Enzo, exclaiming in admiration, "Fantastic! This place can be a real little Nurburgring." Unfortunately, the words of Ferrari almost turned out to be prophetic, and in the mid-90s, after the death of Ratzenberger and Senna, the fate of the Ferrari family track almost repeated the sad fate of a 22-kilometer northern loop, after the famous accident of Niki Lauda, which disappeared from the calendar of World Championships. The San Marino Grand Prix was the third round of the '94 championship. Later, it will be called Black Weekend of Formula One. The first 2 races of the season were won by Michael Schumacher at Benetton, but for Ayrton Senna they ended in failure, and the Brazilian, after moving to Williams, still didn't have a single point to his credit.
We are here in this 3rd round at the European season, starting now. Starting from 0, so basically our championship starts here, 14 races, not 16. And it's not a comfortable position to be in, but that's the reality, and the team is conscious about the challenge we have to make to recover the ground over Benetton, as well the technical development that we must be able to do to improve our car performance.
At the beginning of Friday's qualifying, Rubens Barrichello, who had just earned his first podium, went too hard through the Variante Beza bundle and, at speed about 200 km per hour, jumped on the outer curb and stuck into a tire barrier. Having briefly lost consciousness, the young driver of the Jordan was sent to the hospital in a state of shock, but fortunately escaped with only bruises and broken nose. On the same day, Senna will come to visit Rubens. But while the qualification continued, Ayrton, having previously learned that nothing threatens to the state of Barrichello,
He's alright. He's alright. He's shocked, of course, but he's alright. So, yes.
again tried to find the limit of his Williams. As a result, by the end of the session, Senna sets a time that no one can beat this weekend. The next day, Saturday, at the beginning of second qualification, Michael Schumacher will be able to approach him at the distance of 3/10. Senna was also preparing to leave the pits, but at the time, at the entrance to high-speed bend named after Gilles Villeneuve, at a speed of 314 km per hour in a straight line, Roland Ratzenberger's Sim Take 4 flies off the track. After a strong blow, the Austrian's car flies further and freezes in the Tosa. Ratzenberger, for whom the previous stage was the first in which he was able to qualify and go to the start, tried to improve himself here too. His teammate David Brabham was faster, and Roland also tried to improve. However, shortly before the accident, the Austrian jumped over the curb, damaging the front wing of his car, which after exiting the Tamburello tore off the mounts, making the car uncontrollable. Later, in his interview, Adrian Newey tells that the mechanics of the Simtek 4 turned to him the day before for advice on how to fix the wing. To which Adrian replies, "I couldn't help him without knowing Simtek's wing design. I told him it was the work of their designer, Nick Wirth. When asked where he was, Moody replied that he had gone to a gala dinner. The next day, Roland Ratzenberger crashed due to a broken front wing. The transcendent blow resulted in a fatal fracture of the base of the skull. In fact, Roland died on the spot. Efforts of promptly arrived doctors didn't help, but the paddock didn't know about it right away. Instead of announcing the tragedy on the spot, the body of the Austrian was taken by helicopter to the Bologna hospital, where he was declared dead. Ayrton Senna, who was watching what was happening from the pits, used the safety car to arrive at the scene and find out all the circumstances, for which he later received a reprimand from the direction of the race. Senna answered, and the dialogue with the leadership turned out to be tense. At least someone was concerned about safety. Senna raised his voice. How dare they point out my action to me? I drive a car and they tell me about safety. Perhaps the management were more unhappy with the fact that doctors who removed the rider's body from the car told Ayrton that Roland was already dead. Italian law provides for the closure of any event during which a tragedy occurs until the full clarification of the circumstances. And if the upcoming race were to be cancelled, Segis, the promoter of Imola stage, would lose about $6.5 million, not to mention a one TV broadcast. Knowing all this and taking into account the persuasion of Sid Watkins not to go to the start, Senna nevertheless couldn't refuse to participate in the race. There was more and more pressure and responsibility. On the morning of May 1st, the day of the race, at the briefing of the drivers, everyone actively spoke out in favor of increased security measures. After it, Ayrton advocated the restoration of the activities of the Grand Prix Drivers Association and arranges with the participants to meet at meeting before the next stage in Monaco. After discussing the need for action and taking the Austrian flag with him, Ayrton took his place on pole position. Next to him on the first row was Michael Schumacher, followed by Berger and Hill, Lechte and Larini. Jurki Järvilehti's Benetton stalls at the start. Pedro Larimi, who started from the 22nd position, will see the Finns car at the very last moment. Debris from their collision scatters all over the track and hits the grandstand, injuring several people. By the middle of the second round, the safety car collects racers behind him. Senna, Schumacher, Berger and Hill kept their positions. Trying to maintain the temperature of the tires, the peloton followed safety car until the end of the fifth lap, when the restart was given. Ayrton and Michael passed the sixth lap almost closely, and at the beginning of the seventh, Senna's Williams, at a speed of more than 300 km per hour, breaks off the racing trajectory in Tamburello and tangentially crashes into a concrete wall. From the moment of loss of control, Ayrton Senna's car was moving at a speed of 307 to 309 km per hour, according to telemetry. The impact on the concrete wall occurred at a speed of 211 to 280 km per hour, according to the investigation. The accident happened at 14:17 local time. The race has been stopped. At 14:80, the first doctors arrived at the scene of the accident. 14:20. Having previously removed the helmet, Ayrton was removed from the car. At the moment of impact, the front right wheel, which came off along with the suspension's arms, caused a radar injuries incompatible with life. A fragment of the pendant pierced the helmet's visor and inflicted a severe penetrating 3 to 4 cm deep trauma to the skull above the right eye, simultaneously breaking the temporal artery. Senna lost a lot of blood. At the same time, the blow threw his head to the opposite headrest, causing no less severe injuries, multiple fractures at the base of the skull. Under the guidance of Sid Watkins, doctors performed an operation to clear the airways, perform a tracheotomy, stop the bleeding and fix the neck. Senna had a weak pulse. The doctors did their job, but they understood that the rider's brain showed no signs of life. 14:32. Ayrton is loaded into a medical helicopter which is heading to the Maggiore Hospital in Bologna. 14:38. In flight, Senna's heart stops, but with the effort of doctors it managed to be launched. Senna's wrecked car is taken to a closed park. Employees of Williams, contrary to the rules of FIA, take away the black box from the car, with the assistance of Charlie Whiting, who ordered the technical commissioner to remove it and hand it over to the mechanics. All this time, after the stop of the race, a heavy pause hung over the track, and although the race management received disappointing information from the doctors about Senna's condition, it was decided to continue the race. Bernie Ecclestone assured everyone that everything possible was done for the Brazilian and he was sent to the hospital. The starting green was reformed. It was decided to add the gaps at the moment of stopping the race to the result, and the race started again. At the start, Berger was ahead of Schumacher. Damon Hill also tried to attack Michael Baitoza, but broke the front fender against the uncompromising German, after which he was sent to the pits to replace it. Soon, Schumacher passes Berger and immediately goes to his first pit stop. 2 laps later, the Ferrari driver himself also drives in, but after driving back, he discovers problem with the suspension. Berger leaves and immediately rushes to find out at least some information about Senna. 3 o'clock. Senna was taken to the Maggiore Hospital in Bologna. The scan confirmed the severity of the brain damage. The neurosurgeon who examined Ayrton denied the need for surgery. 15:10. Senna's heart stopped again. Doctors started up again and connected the rider's body to a life support machine. Meanwhile, in Imola, on the way out of the pits, Michele Alboreto lost the low rear wheel of Minardi, injuring several mechanics in the pit lane. Schumacher dominates throughout the race. With a tactics of 3 pit stops, Michael is a minute ahead of Larini and Hakkinen, who finished in the top 3, and Damon Hill, who finished the race 6th, by a lap. There was no champagne at the awards ceremony.
Certainly no good feelings. I mean, just win the race, but I can't feel satisfied. Can't feel happy. I mean, what happened this weekend, never have seen something like this. Not just one thing, so many things. The only thing I can say about this is I hope we learn from this. I think there is a lot to learn from, and we have to use this. And things like this, they shouldn't happen without taking the experience from it.
Immediately after the end of the broadcast, the first official announcement spread around the world. 4 o'clock. The head physician of the hospital, Maria Teresa Fiandri, read out a clinical bulletin that reported a serious brain injury, hemorrhagic shock and deep coma of Ayrton Senna. 18:05. Fiandri read the next bulletin, saying that Senna was clinically dead and only a life support machine supported the work of the heart. 18:37. Senna's heart stops again. Doctors no longer began to run it. 18:40. Maria Teresa Fiandri announced that Senna was dead, and the official time of the death should be 14:70, when the rider's brain was killed by the impact. The news of the death of Ayrton Senna shocked the entire sports community and attracted the attention of the rest of the world. The remains of Williams MCTEC cars were already under the protection of Italian police. An Austrian flag was found in Senna's cockpit, which the Brazilian hoped to get at the finishing line in memory of Roland Ratzenberger. The Brazilian government has declared 3 days of national mourning. Imola got off with reconstruction, but slow as turns forever disfigured the once so attractive high-speed turns of the circuit and made overtaking almost impossible. The spectacle of the races, of course, fell, but the track became much safer, and in 1998 the owners of the circuit received another FIA prize for the best organization of the Grand Prix. However, even if F1 cars were put on rails at the Ferrari family circuit and overtaking disappeared altogether, spectators would still continue to come to the races.